All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Wellness, where we bring people from different aspects of life to talk about people, places, and practices that makes wellness meaningful. Today, we're joined by Amendra, whose finance journey started just at the age of 12, strategically stretching his 50 cents weekly pocket money. He began his career at the age of 20 as an accountant assistant, then left Sri Lanka to develop his expertise internationally in money management and stock markets. Returning as a financial advisor, Amendra noticed a significant gap in his community, the lack of mental health resources. He responded by bringing together psychologists, therapists, yoga teachers, people from marginalized communities. 6 years ago, he co-founded Kalyana.org, a platform connecting wellness seekers with practitioners while creating regenerative mental health projects in Sri Lanka. Amendra, welcome to Let's Talk Wellness. We're excited to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, Jude. Pleasure.
So, on the topic of money, shall we get into it and just talk about money? When you strip away the fear, the conditioning, the societal cultures around money, what is money?
To me, money means a means to an end. Money enables me to do certain things that I wish to do with my life. And the lack of it or an abundance of it sometimes creates issues. So understanding why we need it, how does it relate to us is a critical component, and it's a life's journey because there is no specific answer one could give for money. But eventually, it is a resource which was a barter in those days. We exchanged skills. Today, we use money as a means to do the same thing. But eventually, if you make that your priority, chances are that you end up with the anxiety, the stress, the fear, the insecurity.
What made you show such an interest in money? I mean, I have attended one of your workshops where you talked about money and wellness, how money is quite essential to have a practice in wellness or sustain a practice in wellness. And you shared a little bit about your life story also. So you come across as someone who was quite aware of the need for money in your life. What made you think about money at such an early age, and what sustained that journey?
Yeah, so I was born as the youngest of 7 children, and I was born in 1966 and grew up in the era between 1970 and 77, which was a difficult period in our country. On top of that, my dad fell sick when I was about 6 years old, and my mother had to bring up 7 children on a fairly meager income. And I think she probably is the best accountant in our family, though she was never qualified as an accountant. And I think she instilled in us certain values about the importance of money and how to manage and to extend it. And as a young age, I actually saw that growing up. So I experienced it, and I understood the importance of, one, the ability that she had despite the meager income to also be like the central bank for those people who worked for her. So she was the banker of last resort to anybody who needed that help. And I think I'm very privileged to have been able to learn that firsthand as a youngster growing up. And that has given me the opportunity to take it forward in some form.
Okay. So in your own words, let's try to simplify this and figure out the flow of money. If we look at money as an energy, right? How does it flow? Like for our audience, especially wellness entrepreneurs, wellness practitioners who are quite aware of energy. How does money get involved in this formula as something that flows?
Yeah, so Jude, I think it's a complex question depending on our relationship with money. Money, as I said, is a means to an end. So what is it that we are looking for ourselves? So the money in itself enables us, let's take an example of an entrepreneur who's going into wellness. Why is that person going into the wellness field? Is it to serve somebody? Is it to basically think that it's an easier form of living? Is it because they don't want to take responsibilities and think this is a really fancy lifestyle, you can do things the way you want? But the reality is we also need to eat, drink, and have shelter. So as a result, it's a balance, it's a dilemma as to how we manage that. But the easiest way to really make that work for us is to really understand what our requirements are. What is it that we are seeking to do? For example, if you leave the corporate sector where you're paid a salary, somebody else takes all the stress of running the organization, making sure there is enough money to pay the salaries. The moment you become an entrepreneur, you take that role on. While somebody employs you, you will say, I need work-life balance. I'll work only 6 hours or 8 hours. But if you're an entrepreneur and you are running your own business, you probably will work 12 to 18 hours and you wouldn't even think it's work, because you're doing something that's passionate to you. So this is the striking that balance and understanding the importance of money and how it relates to you. You don't need money abundantly. For example, in my life, I made a choice of not owning a property because I wanted to do certain things, and if I invested in a property and locked up all my capital, I would probably have to sacrifice doing some of the things I'm doing now. However, I'll be very careful not to advise somebody else without personally talking to them as to why they would make such a life choice, because there are risks attached to it. As a youngster of 35, I would say yes, buy some property as an investment for yourself, because obviously you need something for a rainy day. But that particular balance is so important to understand at an individual level. I'm wary about generalizing it. We can talk about investment opportunities and what we can do, but when it comes to each person's relationship with money, it's an important discussion to have one-on-one. And as a wellness practitioner, the choice you make and why you make it becomes imperative to understand how money will support or disable that activity. And I think that's an important conversation for us to have in a little bit more depth. But broadly speaking, remember that if you do, even as a wellness practitioner, you're starting a business. And a business requires you to pay yourself a salary, even if you pay nobody else. And that salary must be commensurate to meet your physical needs. And those needs have to extend through your life. So as a practitioner, if one day you're unable to work, for instance, you got chikungunya, you were a yoga teacher, for 2 months you can't conduct classes. How do you sustain yourself? So therefore, setting aside some emergency funds with the money you have becomes an important thing to consider. Because otherwise, often I find people who want to do a lot of this stuff expect a lot of support from everybody around them, but don't take personal accountability. I'm a firm believer that we need to support our own activity, and the universe will then support us as well as we go forward.
Beautifully put. So what you're saying is also money, because you keep saying this thing that money is means to an end. And this is something that we get when we are in the corporate world, a sense of safety, because we get a salary, we might have a cushy insurance, we might have rainy day funds. So when you leave all that to become a wellness entrepreneur, as someone who's done that also, I was lucky enough to have a rainy day fund when I left it, but I burned through it in my first 2 years. I burned through it because I think it's a very common goal for wellness entrepreneurs, wellness practitioners, to be in pursuit of wealth.
Yes.
True wealth, right? We call it.
Correct.
Wealth is the quality of living.
Yep.
Wealth is the pursuit of our own spirituality, and people who understand, as people who understand these concepts, we tend to then go all in.
Yes.
Not think about the energy of money, what it actually means to have a good relationship with money.
Yes.
And then we run into all these problems. Oh, now I am struggling with money. I don't feel safe, and I know for a fact, because it has happened in my life, and through the academy we talk to other wellness practitioners with the same challenge. The main challenge is, how do I build up a brand knowing that my life is uncertain, or this sense of uncertainty is a very common thing in this field. So what's your advice? Let's talk some practical tools. Like, what's your advice for
Yeah.
wellness
So
practitioners?
so basically, I will also digress a little bit in terms of saying, for your financial wellness, your mental wellness matters, because your attitude towards money and the ability to have a strong mind will enable you to also have a healthy relationship with finances and money. The failure to do that gives you the anxiety, right? So I think strangely in my life, I've set up two organizations. One is Kalyana and one is the Avastha Financial Advisory Service, which I think blends in. Because when I talk to a lot of people suffering with mental health issues, finance becomes a critical component. Many of them feel insecure, and that causes them to feel fear. So the issue, again, you can look at practical examples. As a youngster, right, you have certain expense components you need to meet for your day-to-day living. So when you decide to go on a journey of spiritual search, you have choices you make. Do you go and go into an ashram and decide to be part of that community? You're minimalist in terms of your money needs. But if you decide that you want to enhance and share your experiences with others and become a wellness practitioner, like a yoga teacher or a mindfulness guru, then why are you doing it? And if you're doing it with your spiritual journey in mind, and you are quite sincere about the pursuit, you will find that organically you will grow your business. And today, my conversation earlier this morning with you was also about the fact that we need to understand that if we leave the corporate sector, why are we leaving the corporate sector? Was it because we were unable to manage the mental pressures? If we chose to leave a corporate because we were unable to manage the mental pressures and we decided yoga was going to support us, why didn't yoga support us when we were in the corporate sector? Because if you're going to teach people to use yoga in their corporate journey, because 90% of them are not going to become yoga teachers, they want to continue their corporate life, but you're providing yoga as a means to find balance in that corporate journey. Now, if you are unable to use yoga to manage that corporate journey yourself, then you're going to be very challenged in terms of teaching others to adopt the practice. So I think the finance role, as critical as it is, the real deeper question is to find meaning as to why you're doing what you're doing. Then I think a lot of the finance things will unravel, and there is a lot of support around us today to be able to support you in identifying ways and means, one, to grow your revenue, to manage your costs, and to set up certain simple investment programs that you would do. For example, if you charge 2,500 rupees or 5,000 rupees for a yoga class per hour, 10% of that money has to go into a kitty. The first thing you do, the balance 4,500 you use. And so therefore, if you have 20 days of practice, you have 10,000 rupees in a kitty, right? It could be a till, the good old till that we used to have as kids, dropping a coin. Simple practices. When you get to a 5,000, 10,000 saving, that you move into a bank where you will earn a little bit of interest on top of that. It's like your EPF, ETF when we are working in the corporate sector. That builds up into a cushion for you. So you do the similar kind of things that will support you, that when you have these awkward sessions where things you feel burnt out or you feel that you're not in a good space, you want to take a break, you have those emergency funds. So that's a simple example of what can be done. The other thing is the choice about when you decide to embark on your journey. You said you had a little cushion before you decided to go there. That's one way to practice this. Right? You don't jump at the first time you feel the stress at a corporate job. You say, look, I'm going to give it up and go down south and live by the sea. But you make plans. You say, look, I want to change this journey that I started. And then you build up a cushion. You have a purpose to be in the corporate sector for a couple of years more. And that becomes a mechanism for you to put aside the savings to build for the future. Unfortunately, one has to make certain sacrifices in life. And life We must all learn to accept that. When we keep confronting it and trying to deny that that's the reality, it becomes an issue. Often in my journey, going back to my reason to go to Bahrain was very simple. I had just set my finals, waiting my results. The guy came for an interview from the Middle East. My brother lived there. He said, look, these guys are coming from Ernst & Young. Why don't you go for an interview? The guy from Pakistan had an interview with me. He heard that I had played cricket. He just said, look, I want to set up a cricket team in Bahrain. When can you come? He didn't even bother to ask me about the qualifications. So I went, took a risk and went. Why? Because my brother had sponsored my entire education. And each of my brothers had done that for the other brother. And the first thing was, at 26, I had a negative balance sheet. I owed money. I didn't have any assets. But once you went there, the first priority was to set aside the money to pay my brother back. And after that, you start slowly, but gradually. For all young people, my advice is, look, you have 45 years of work ahead of you, whether you're a wellness entrepreneur. So you're going to earn more, because as your practice grows, you're going to be earning more. So the initial 3 years, like everything we do in life, you have to plant a seed, you have to wait till the plant grows. Like that, learn to look at investing time. And during that process, that cushion of having that funding to enable that plant to come up is like what you're doing for your business. And if you are good at what you do, 9 times out of 10, you will find that the money will come. And often, Jude, you probably know this, right? There are practitioners in the Ayurvedic space who are very gifted. I mean, what do? They don't charge. They basically tell you, leave what you want. Why? Because they believe they were gifted something from the universe and they don't want to exploit that gift. So that's a good message for all of us. Sometimes we have learned, and the idea is that we don't exploit that gift. We actually use it to share it. And even in the wellness space, that is why I feel wellness practitioners, if their condition, if their minds work in a particular fashion and they're genuine about what they want to do, money will never become the issue.
Beautifully put. What are some sure ways? No, let's rephrase that. What are some safe ways to create structure? We're talking to a global audience, right? You're well versed in financial markets. Let's talk a little bit about how to set up rainy day funds. You talked a little bit into putting something in the bank and getting some interest. I think it's very regional to countries like Sri Lanka, where we have some high interest rates. But let's say you're in a country like Europe. Can you speak to that? What are some safer ways to create rainy day funds or create some savings?
Yes. So let's take an example. Let's say I earn 10,000 rupees a month. Let's say I spend 7,000 rupees on my upkeep. I have 3,000 rupees left. So the idea is to try and allocate that 3,000 rupees into different buckets. So the first bucket would be a simple vanilla fixed deposit, like an interest, maybe the savings account, or a fixed deposit, depending on the magnitude of the money you have. So let's say out of the 3,000 rupees, you put aside 25% as an example of the 3,000 into that, which is easily accessible to you when you need it. So that's why you put it into a savings account. A fixed deposit has generally a maturity period. So for 6 months, you might not be able to use it, or for 1 year, or whatever the tenure is. In Sri Lankan context, you now have the opportunity to put it into what is known as unit trust. And I think from as low as 1,000 rupees, you could buy units in either fixed income or share market. So let's take the example of the 3,000 rupees. 25% you put it into a savings account. Another 25% you put into a fixed deposit. The balance 50% you decide to allocate maybe into a high risk area like the stock market. But you and I don't have the expertise to do that. So we then invest in a fund that actually manages this by professionals. And you just set aside every month, you decide to invest X amount in that equity and participate in the equity fund. When that equity fund grows, there will be ups and downs because stock markets have peaks and troughs, right? But they are managed by professionals who are generally well versed in understanding how to protect that to the best ability. You and I might find it difficult to do. Once you have built that equity to a particular amount, you may decide that this 3,000 rupees, which has now accumulated to X amount, you start allocating property, for example. Typically, if I was to advise young people, I would say between the ages of 20 to 30, you're building this cash foundation. But from 30 onwards, you may look at property because it depends on your circumstances. Are you married? Do you have children? Then the demands will be very different. If you're talking only about the wellness practitioners, and many of them may have combined income because both partners are doing similar work, for example, they may build up a cushion, which then they say, okay, now we have got 100,000 or ₹1,000,000. Maybe 50% of that money should be in something like a property, where we make an investment, where we live in or do something rather than renting. And then if I was talking to an older audience who are in their 50s or 60s, this property, they may ask the question, why do we need the property at 60 years? We have no children. Then you may decide that you will sell the property, go back into having the cash, then you have a little bit of income coming to meet your monthly needs. So this journey, as I said, I'm very mindful that we can't give general answers because it will vary so significantly based on the life circumstances of who sits in front of me. And that's really important.
Yeah, I like that. There's no cookie cutter way of looking at it. But if I understand you correctly, it's your relationship with money, right?
Correct.
So as someone who comes from the finance background and also co-founded a platform to promote mental health, you must come across this concept of money wounds, right? What is the biggest wound when it comes to healing that relationship with money? Because what I understand from this conversation is that it is about the mindset, how we see money.
Yes.
That it is something that works for us rather than we working for that aspect of money. And as wellness practitioners, I think this is also what we need to understand, that we're stepping away from rigid structures, which is corporate world. It's very good at making money, creating abundance out of money.
Yes.
And when you are in wellness, you tend to find the balance. So that might mean that you have stepped away from that rigid structure. So you might have to get a bit creative. So I feel like it's more important to then understand the relationship with money. What is the biggest challenge when it comes to money wounds, and how can we create a mindset where we see money as a medium and not as ultimate wealth?
Yeah, so I just also refer back to that corporate experience you spoke about. Today, a lot of people in corporate talk about stress. But very often I tell my nieces and nephews, you work in a corporate, you want to work in the best branded corporate. You want to be paid the best. That comes at a price. Because if you do work for those organizations, there is a demand, right? You are one of the few who got employment in that corporate. And the corporate takes risk to be able to make this abundance you talk about, right? So my view is that while we look at that, and then these same people want to go into the wellness space, they have to be mindful now they take on the risk of that entrepreneur. And in taking on that risks, there will be challenges. And the money wounds you talk about generally come through your childhood experience. How did your parents deal with money? And sometimes the insecurity that was conveyed by your parents, saying, we spend so much money on your education, like what are you giving back? You're wasting so much money. So these become traumatic to you. Or there was a lack of money in the home. So you feel a sense of fear, an insecurity, and you're trying to fill that void. So many of the people in the corporate sector will want to get more and more, and we say they're greedy. But it's more than the greed, it's just that they're trying to secure themselves. But you and I both know there is no security in life. COVID can happen. Economic downturns can happen. Bankruptcy can happen. We don't control any of that. But if we had a healthy relationship whatever that takes place, you will learn to manage it efficiently. An example for a mental health practitioner or wellness practitioner is the question of medical. There's a huge insecurity about the cost of hospitalization. I told myself, because I made certain life choices, that if I'm older and I needed a surgery and I didn't have medical insurance, you could go and get government assistance for free. So the choice was to tell your family that if you had a serious illness and needed surgery, please put me to Jayabodhanapura or to KDU or to the general hospital. I don't go to the bigger hospitals, which I can't afford to do. So if you make that conscious choice as a 30-year-old, 35-year-old, 40-year-old, that's an option for me, then the insecurity and fear of where am I going to get the money if I fall sick is no issue again. Because there are alternatives. The only difference is the government hospitals, the conditions may be a little bit more challenging than going to a private hospital. But one can make those choices, because then you don't have to set aside huge amounts of saving for your medical or your medical insurance policy, which costs you maybe 200,000-300,000 a year. You don't need to worry about. So as I said, that's that relation. So when you have trauma, when you use the word trauma, I think that trauma can only be healed through conversation. To talking to a therapist, talking to a financial advisor, to make you understand. I can give you an example of one of my clients who had significant wealth. When I say significant wealth. But who used to have tea without sugar, thinking that they'll run short of money. And this is real. So there must have been some trauma that person went through to feel such insecurity with such a big bank balance. There are others who don't have any of that, but live extremely happily. So trauma has to be healed through communication, through work, through practice. And as a wellness practitioner, you're really inculcating that into your life. So the word financial trauma should be something that actually is slowly eaten away, and you are able to fill the void through your own practice. Because I'm a firm believer, through Kalyana we talk about alternative practices. Alternative practices mean you build certain activities into your life, whether it's journaling, sound healing, art therapy. All of these support you to give you balance. So even as a wellness practitioner, you need support, right? You may be very good as a yoga teacher, but that doesn't make you whole in terms of how you manage your mind, right? You need to work and have those multidisciplinary things to be able to be rounded. So that's really about how I would say how you manage your trauma. And don't look for that magic bullet that says, oh, if I do this, if I take this tablet, I'm fine. Because it's a journey, Jule, and I think throughout our lives, we will hit roadblocks in different ways. But our ability to be resilient is built upon building these practices. And I myself don't have the answers. I am sharing this through my own struggles. Every day you have different types of struggles, but you learn to put into practice what helps you when you had those struggles. And the more you talk about it, the more you surround yourselves with people who are like-minded, you get the uplift and the support you need. And that's available everywhere.
I love that. It's beautifully put. I think I can resonate to this. The mindset that I also try to cultivate is that money is agile. You should always think about the opportunity cost. When you spend something, what are you giving up?
Exactly.
And having enough support to actually normalize the practice or the conversation around money.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we lack as a culture, that we are very
sure.
shy to talk about money. So I fully agree that it's about cultivating that culture of talking about your.
So basically, you have to be very mindful when you borrow for consumption. And often in poorer societies, borrowing for consumption is the reality, because they don't have the day-to-day to feed themselves. But when you borrow for consumption, the payback, how do you pay that back? So then you need to be very careful that you borrow for the least cost. And that means to be very mindful, where are the places you can get low-cost funds? It's hard for a person who doesn't have an asset to go to a financial institution and borrow. So generally it's your friends and family that you first go to. Secondly, if you are looking at an investment, then borrowing makes sense, because let's assume that I go and I borrow from the bank 10,000 rupees at 10% per annum. But I am deploying that money into an agriculture project. So if I earn 15% on the agriculture produce and I have to pay 10% to the bank for the interest, I am making 5% more on 10,000 rupees I did not have. So therefore, borrowing is not all bad. Borrowing, the purpose of borrowing becomes critical. So if I went and had dinner for 10,000 rupees and I was paying 10% interest on my credit card, which is the highest interest, that becomes an issue, because how do I pay that back? What is my source of income to cover that cost? So that is very critical. And today it is very, very important to realize there is a term called loan sharks in the market, where you can borrow at excessive interest rates, maybe 10% a month. So today if you borrow at 10% a month, that's 120% a year. There is no way that you can go into an investment that gives you that kind of return. So you have to be very mindful. And it's not the loan shark that you have to be worried about, because that he's doing his business. We don't have to use it. We go in desperation, but that can be very alarmingly dangerous, because there have been situations that people have experienced very, very bad situations through the loan shark. So typically, even a credit card, if you do take a credit card, it can be really useful, because you do get 1 month's credit, but you must learn to pay it on the due date. There are many stories I have come across that they pay the minimum amount and keep rolling this, and you're paying 30% more on the money that you borrowed. And suddenly 2 years later you realize, oh my God, I used my credit card for 100,000, but I was only paying 10,000. On the balance 90,000, I've been paying 30% interest. And that's a huge sum of money. So a lot of education needs to be, people need to be made aware of how to manage that. And that's why I said, Joe, this individual conversation, there are competent resources doing this kind of service. Sometimes you can use a friend to do it, but I feel we need to sometimes pay for professional services. In Sri Lanka, we will pay anything for a doctor. We will pay anything for a lawyer. One keeps us healthy, one keeps us out of jail. But everything else, we just want to call and get some free advice. But free advice doesn't pay at the end of the day, because that professional is doing a job as well. So if you say, I am great at yoga, I want another person to manage my finances, you're spending all your time on your professional skill and you're getting somebody else to provide his professional skill. Like I first said, it was the barter system back in the day, right? You grew onions, I grew paddy, we shared our crop. And we had a meal. Money is just that exchange, just become a different medium. So I think the myth, the fear, we need to work through that. And you can only do that by educating yourself, dealing with it. Often, most of us tend to avoid things that we feel uncomfortable about. Right? This conversation with you and me today is not my comfort zone. Right? But by embracing it, you actually, the fear goes out of the equation. Because otherwise your mind keeps worrying about having to deal with it at some point, and you will have to confront it. And at the point you're not positioned to manage it, because you have not educated yourself, not dealt with it, it becomes a bigger problem. It's almost like what we talk about in the mental health space. What was a very, very small, tiny wound, when unaddressed, becomes a sore, becomes an ulcer. So even with mental health, we always say prevention. There are many things, the wellness practitioners, that's what you all are doing, to help people to balance that equation. So once you get to that space and you learn to confront what your fear, actually the fear dissipates. And I think that's the important message, I think, even when it comes to money.
Beautiful. What is wealth to you?
Wealth to me today is spending time with people. Certainly not monetary, but money also helps, because money enables you to do certain things. Money enables you to share. Money enables you to help and support somebody. So For me, the wealth is really being able to have just enough to be able to provide that balance, not the material, because at the end of the day, people have sounded this that we never take anything when we leave the planet, right? So that's a reality. So why are we then? And I'll give you a good example. 9 o'clock one evening, when I was living down in Lake Drive by the canal, I drove out at 9 o'clock in the evening, and out of the water came this bird, the white one with the long beak, with a fish in its mouth. And what really struck me was, most living beings, bar the human being, don't store stuff in a barn, don't accumulate and accumulate, but they are provided shelter, they are provided food and water. And that was another reason for me to embark on some of the work I do, because I realized if I just accumulated, I can't get the same satisfaction looking at a bank balance that I would get with human interaction. And to me, wealth is that ability to enjoy a human interaction and be a part of somebody's life as well.
Beautifully put. All right. I think we talked a lot about the mindset that we require to really move through life with a good relationship with money. And yeah, like you said, I think it's not a one size fit all solution.
Absolutely.
It needs
Absolutely.
we need to have that conversation with friends, preferably advisors. And yeah, I hope we gave some clarity to an audience about money and wellness and wealth. Thank you, Amendra, for sitting with me and having this chat both off the camera and on camera. I want to just roll out the red carpet for you to just promote your work. I know you just started this initiative where you are offering customized help for people who have these questions, including myself. I think it's a very common question for us to have: how to actually manage our money, how to build a healthy relationship with our money. So tell us, how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so simply put, Jude, I think yes, people can reach me through the Avastha.lk website, but more so than that, they can actually reach me personally through my phone or email, personal email, which I'll share. But the whole purpose of this exercise has been because I myself, who set this company up 14 years ago, it was dormant. But over the last, let's say 1.5 years, and with the corporate wellness event we did in January, where we did bring in financial wellness, there seemed to be a real need. And more than anything, I wanted to share my own experience, and I felt that actually doing it professionally probably made more sense, because people really do need to understand that professional time has to be also acknowledged, because everything in life we've been given free, we become an entitled nation. There is hardly any embarrassment realizing that we are a bankrupt country. All of us are guilty in creating this environment, and I think we need to take responsibility. So my offering is about saying, do a personal counseling session on finance just to understand where you stand today. What are the little things you could do in order to achieve some of your aspirations, and build the platform and work towards getting there. And the idea being that, again, this journey is right through your life. So whatever you invest today will help you to be able to cement yourself in such a way that you enjoy what you do without having to make finance a critical component of your life and let that overwhelm you. So as I said, they can reach me through my email, personal email, which I'm sure you can share, along with my mobile number, and I'll be happy to take on board some of them, and if there is some value, I'm happy to do that as a group or individually, depending on the need and affordability. Yes.
And maybe in the future we can create some sort of a group program on our academy also. Could be like a one-off thing where we
Absolutely.
bring a bunch of people and we can just workshop the mindset that requires to have a healthy relationship to money.
Absolutely. The way I look at it is, the workshop environment, as long as it's not too large,
Right.
is functional.
Right.
Because again, in a larger environment, people will be feeling a little uncomfortable maybe to reach out and talk about certain things. Whereas groups of 5 to 7 people becomes very much more manageable. We can go into a little bit of detail.
Right.
Whereas if it's a larger 30, 40, 50 people, then it becomes a little bit more restrictive and everybody doesn't have an opportunity to share their personal stuff. So I feel the smaller groups work a lot better in this field.
Yeah. Just like in life, I think smaller groups are always better.
Yes,
when
more
we want
intimate
to-
and you have a greater depth in what you
Yes,
discuss and not
exactly.
superficial. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So one last question. We always ask this when we have guests on board. 3 words to describe wellness to you.
3 words to describe wellness.
Just 3 words. You can think about it. You don't have to give any-
I really do. When you talk about wellness, is like it's so individual to me. Like, what does wellness mean to me? For me, wellness means I get up feeling positive about my life, and that to me is wellness. Whether I'm sick or not sick, if I wake up with a smile on my face, that is wellness, right? I have no thing to say, okay, my health is in good shape, my finances are in good shape. I don't take a box. For me, wellness means, is my mind centered? Do I feel comfortable wherever I am? Now, these are things I'm working on myself, because I don't, as I said before, I don't have the answers. And in 3 words, it's hard to really capture, other than to say, to have balance. To avoid the extreme. Moderation, as the Buddha put it, is probably the simple way to capture wellness.
Yeah, I like it. I think we can have balance, moderation, and positive thoughts. As you said. Yeah. All right. I think that's it. That's a
Thank
wrap.
you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Absolute
And-
pleasure, Jude.
Bye.
Bye.
Amendra.